With his magnificent robe and headdress, his friendly but authoritative and informed manner, and his commanding presence, he draws the crowds to him and then casts his spell.
I've got a horse! I've got a horse to beat a favorite! Black man for luck, white man for pluck.
Got the shock of my life. I was looking straight into the eyes of what I thought was an African chief.
And I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, he looked about 1,000,000 miles high.
With blue and red ostrich feathers, in flowing robes, you just stand and think, am I dreaming?
Who give you cocoa? The black man. Who give the rock and roll? The black man. Who give the winner? Prince Monolulu, black man for luck.
For over 40 years, this patter could be heard across the country, on racetracks, in cinemas, and booming out of gramophones. It was the voice of Ras Prince Monolulu. Standing tall in his exotic costumes, lucky charms swinging from his neck, and his eyes, they're smiling eyes. To me, it's clear that he's standing there as a charismatic star. He made his fame as a racing tipster, but became an original total celebrity. He was the first black person ever to appear on British television, and he continued to enchant the nation until his death in the 60s. But think about this for a second. Have you ever heard of him? I mean, most people haven't. His story has fallen through the cracks of history. But me, as a black man, as an entertainer, a performer, his story is a part of mine, and I want to tell it.
Prince Monolulu was a character. He was a racing tipster, but he's also going out and hustling for any kind of work, as many black men had to do in those days in order to survive.
That's historian and author Stephen Bourne.
He came here in the Edwardian era. He came here around 1903, 1904, and he's hustling all the time. But what he does is quite unusual and almost unique. He creates a character.
For I'm Prince Monolulu, woo, 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 from a sunny Honolulu.
Really?
I'm the oldest dusky tipster, woo, woo, woo. I'm a known on every coast.
Monolulu's story, as told by Monolulu, is so rich with myth and wild claims. It's hard to know the truth. There's no hard facts, no blue plaque, no museum write-ups. I want to know how much of his character was actually invented and how much was really him. I mean, he became famous as a racing tipster, but did he even like horses? I think this was maybe just a simple way of him trying to mingle with the rich and famous, another way to survive. Who was this man, and where does our story begin? Here's John Pearson. He's a retired policeman who's actually turned his detective skills onto the Monolulu case.
Most of the newspapers said that he came from various countries. He even claimed he came from Ethiopia.
I was born in Ethiopia from a wandering tribe, lived in the mountain of Hara, known as Falasha.
I think Monolulu had the idea that to sell tips he had to attract people, and the more he could make up stories as well as to tell true stories as well, the better, more likely he would attract people so he could sell his tips to them. But eventually, after a lot of research, we managed to establish, in fact, he was born in St. Croix in the American Virgin Islands.
Hello, Karen.
Hello, Steve.
That's the voice of Dr. Karen C. Thurland. Now, I was very excited to talk to her because not only is she a historian based in St. Croix, but she's also a personal relative of Monolulu. I mean, it was a bit of a coup, to be honest.
Monolulu would be my great-great-uncle. My mother explained when she was a young girl, her grandfather used to sit on his chair and look out at the sea, and he would say, "Peter MacKay, Peter MacKay." And she said one day, she asked him, "Who is Peter MacKay?" And he told her, "He's my brother who left the island and never came back."
You too might be thinking, who is Peter MacKay? Well, yes, it turns out that Ras Prince Monolulu did not only invent a story about coming from Ethiopia, but he also made up the name. Ras Prince Monolulu was not actually royalty at all, but the illegitimate son of Catherine Heiliger and Archibald MacGregor. His real name, Peter Carl Mackay, would originally come from one of the Scottish slave-owning families on the island. Slavery had only been abolished in 1848, little over 30 years before Monolulu was born. So, it's fair to deduce that his grandparents probably would have been slaves. And do we have any indication as to why he might have left the island?
Well, that time the economy was very slow, seeming to be a very talented and creative person. I guess the island life was kind of dull to him. He left the island when he was around 18. He was a stowaway on a ship.
He was a stowaway? Wow, this is very interesting. So therefore, if a young man who's 18, 19, whose grandparents were slaves, and he must have known that, and he's seeing the economy shrinking, and he's got an active mind, he wants to travel the world and see other things.
Exactly. And his brother was a tailor, which, you know, it's a trade that you have to be very patient. Maybe he didn't want to go in that field of work.
Which is very interesting, bearing in mind all the outfits he ended up wearing himself, and being a very, very flamboyant and brightly dressed individual.
I thought of that, and I said I wondered if he was ever an apprentice with his older brother, because I see the designs on his clothes in the pictures.
These designs are by no stretch of the imagination easy to do. The handwork, the stitching, the thought process, the symmetry is very creative, thinking about the colours, the patterns, the styling. And I can imagine him sitting there by a sewing machine with his leg going up and down as he's sewing and weaving along. Okay, so he's got the outfit sorted. But how did he get onto the idea of being a racing tipster?
His brother, my great-grandfather, had a racing horse. Horse racing was a sport that was around here for many, many years. It still is today.
Do you know, I had no idea that his brother had a horse. That actually puts everything into more context. Because originally I thought the people in England who owned horses were the wealthy people, the people who were from a particular social structure. And I imagined that he used his brain power to go, what is the best way to get into these people? I know, horse racing. But actually that may not have been the case. It could be that that is one of his passions, because his brother had a horse. Wow. Wow, I've just got goosebumps after that. So, this is what we know so far. Monolulu was actually called Peter, and he's probably developed a knowledge of tailoring and horse racing from his brother. But he wants something more than the sleepy island life that St. Croix has to offer. He sneaks onto a ship and sets sail to an unknown land.
Monolulu would have done what a lot of black men did at that time. He would have joined the circus. He would have been an artist model, but he would have gone where the work is. And if a guy contacted him from Germany saying, there's a gig over here, there's a circus or whatever, come and work over here, there's good money to be earned, he would have gone.
A gentleman gave me a job, he paid me, and there was a carnival, and there I became a fortune teller, all over, in a small circus, riding horses.
There are stories, of course, that Prince Monolulu was in fact a prisoner of war, a captured British merchant seaman.
This, for me, is probably the saddest part of the Monolulu story. He wanted a better life. He got on a ship as a young man, essentially looking for freedom. And here he is, in Europe. His freedom has been taken away from him as a prisoner of war. There's a certain kind of sad irony there.
And he ended up in Ruhleben, which is very close to Berlin, I understand. And in fact, situated on what was an old racecourse, seems very appropriate. But it was an exceptional camp in that it was run basically by the inmates themselves. It seemed they used to have their own orchestra, their own poem societies and all sorts of things like that. So it was quite a unique situation.
Could this be where Monolulu honed his creativity, his acting skills, getting ready to play the role he would play for the rest of his life?
Birds will sing, bells they ring, bees will they make honey.
My name's Matthew Stibbe. I'm a professor of modern European history at Sheffield Hallam University. So like the other prisoners, Prince Monolulu would have stayed in a horse box, probably in the Black Barracks, 6 to a horse box, so very, very overcrowded, lack of privacy. The horse boxes were made of brick, not wood, but they still would have been very cold. Certainly they would have been aware of its role as a racetrack. They had access to the grandstand and were able to walk up and down the seating areas of the racetrack.
I can just imagine him up in the grandstand looking out over the race course. I think this is where he's bringing up his plan. Yeah, standing back, thinking once I get out of here, I'm going to be part of this, but I'm not going to be a man in the crowd. I'm going to hold court. I'm going to try and make some money. I'm going to place a few bets. As the war draws to a close in 1918, the prisoners of Ruliban are released and Monolulu travels to England. And where is the first place he heads when he's free? From the racetrack of Ruliban to the racetracks of England to find his fame and fortune. So, guess where I'm headed? Well, here we are in just outside Chichester, world-famous race course, a place called Goodwood. So, we're now trying to figure out a way of getting in. I feel like I'm doing a horse race myself. We're going to have to jump over this fence. Oh, oh wow, this is exciting. This is my first ever horse race. I should want some money on it. Oh, people seem to be shouting, run! Run! And I found the man I was looking for, the legendary John McCrirrick. You may remember this voice.
One man, 11-2 strong promise, grow up. 8-1 against Barton back.
Yeah, it's that guy. Flamboyant outfits, iconic patter, a real character in British racing today. Well, I think he could be our modern-day Monolulu, and I'm hoping he can give me some insight into why Monolulu became such a star.
Remember the age we're living in, especially after the Second World War. It was a time of real austerity. There was not much luxury about it. So along comes rash Prince Monolulu, dressed up, and the way he sort of presented himself, and I got a horse and all that sort of thing. It was a sort of something that was needed an antidote.
He was very famous in his day.
Oh, he was. But one of the reasons he was famous was the media. Because what did the media have to show? When you're covering racing, you can be covering a race meeting for 2.5 hours, and you get 10 minutes of action. He was a colourful character, loud voice, crowds really sort of surrounding him. That was the only news story you had.
I've got to say, though, when I look at you, John, I see a man full of character. I see a man who looks a bit larger than life. So is there any element of Prince Monolulu in you?
I'd envy Prince Monolulu. It's what people give to the game, and he gave to the game. To be a star now is really you've got to have some talent. For goodness sake, the rules you out, Amos, for a start. But you've got to have some talent. He didn't have any talent at all, but he marketed himself.
If I was to get myself some African robes, perhaps don some feathers in my hair, and even go as far as buying myself a title, Lord Stephen Amos. Do you think I could be the new Prince Monolulu?
Well, the trouble is, it wouldn't be now, it wouldn't be anything special. There are so many tipsters about, there's so many show-offs about, all these reality stars.
Who would do such a thing?
Yeah, but they're nobodies, absolutely nobodies. Here he comes along, and there was no one else. But there he was, the centre of attention. He had the name, he had the character, and he had the pizzazz, and he had the intelligence to play on it.
Now listen to me, please. In the next race, nothing.
And this was in an age before social media, don't forget. And he didn't have an agent, but he used his wit and this act to bring the crowds to him. And he saw everything as an opportunity to self-promote. I could learn a thing or two from him.
I've got a gas mask protector. Protect anybody in London.
Prince Monolulu has evidently adapted himself to the new conditions. He would.
I give you a gas mask. Are we afraid of Hitler? No! Are we dumb-hearted? No!
There's a newsreel of him in 1939 trying to sell the idea of using gas masks because Hitler's come in and you need to wear your gas mask. And also in 1944, there's another newsreel of him talking to children that are being re-evacuated because in 1944, the buzz bombs come. So he's being used in a context where he's being kind and almost like an uncle to children of Britain while they're being re-evacuated out to the countryside. So he's a kind of reassuring figure in the war years and used in that way. It's brilliant.
So would you say he wasn't far off being a national treasure?
Oh, he was a national treasure.
Wow.
I wouldn't say he was far off. He was, on the button, a national treasure.
Whereabouts in Ethiopia are you a prince?
In Addis Ababa, but I belong to the Falasha tribe.
Oh.
See, there's a great nation. One is Coptic, Mohammedan, the other one is Jewish, known as the Falasha.
He's covered all. He's covered every eventuality there, isn't he?
I went to meet my friend, the acclaimed actress Cleo Sylvester, to discuss Monolulu's character. Now, the archive you're hearing is Monolulu as a contestant on a game show hosted by Groucho Marx. And I have to say, he's stealing the show. I mean, at this point, he's still a famous name in the racing world, but now he's become more like a modern-day celebrity, travelling the world and making appearances on TV and radio.
When man ruled a woman, but today the art of change, and the woman rules the man, to be or not to be.
When he's asked those questions, he doesn't look like he's thinking too much, but whatever he says just flows sort of naturally.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
That's obviously stuff he's said before many, many times.
Yeah. A bit like a stand-up.
Do you know Haile Selassie?
Yes, sir, I met him in Bath. On the proper side.
It doesn't even sound rehearsed. He sounds very convincing. If you were at home watching that, you'd think, yeah, I believe that. I buy everything he says.
I know, but he must. Oh, God, what a showman. He gives off this happy-go-lucky type person, but really, there's more to it. He's playing the buffoon, but he's underneath it all. There is an intelligence.
He's definitely playing up to certain things. I don't think he's being quite a buffoon because there are snippets of the well-read. You know, when he slips in, Shakespeare quotes,
yes.
and when he knows the different tribes of Ethiopia,
yes.
he slips those in.
Yeah.
He's, in one way, he is kind of playing up to something, but he undercuts it with facts.
Yes. Basically, what I'm saying is that here's somebody who has maybe read quite a lot and developed this persona because he knew that was a way out.
I can understand exactly what you mean, yeah. I didn't just come to see Cleo to talk about Monolulu's performance. She actually remembers meeting him when she was a child. I'll set the scene. It's Soho, it's in the 50s. Cleo's mum is wheeling her along in a pram, and she's about 3 years old. And?
Imagine sitting in a pushchair and seeing this amazing figure that just went on and on and on and on. And not only that, there were all these incredible feathers, brightly coloured feathers, right at the top. It was just incredible. A sort of longish face with, I remember, some freckles and a couple of gold teeth.
A couple of gold teeth, well ahead of his time.
And I saw him quite a bit. I mean, we'd see him down at Petticoat Lane. Went to his flat. He had a flat in Cleveland Street. I remember going there.
In the flat, did you see Monolulu out of his costume?
I never saw him out of his costume.
Wow. So even in his own home, he never came out of costume? He was totally committed to the role. I mean, it's the early version of method acting.
He emanated sort of positivity. He wasn't, most black people sort of kept their head down and got on with life. He was bigger than life. He was the Pied Piper. The kids used to follow him and love him.
It's funny you should say that, because I and other kids of my generation simply loved you.
Just as long as you've got time to be LAY.
I mean, you are, of course, the legendary Derek Griffiths.
I've never thought myself as a legend. That's quite interesting.
I have to tell you that you have been a soundtrack to my formative years.
Oh, thank you.
Now, I'm talking to you today because I found out about this gentleman Ras Prince Monolulu. And I was fascinated by this man's story, and then also fascinated when I found out in my research of him that you kind of knew him. You kind of grew up in the same neighbourhood.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit more about this flamboyant character?
Yes. I lived in New Cavendish Street. He lived in Cleveland Street.
And, of course, the West End, when you think about it now, is a very, very affluent area, and there's a lot of money. But back then, how would you describe the area of the West End?
Well, the West End was a village. I mean, it was an immigrant's village. I mean, you had the Jews were, running the tailor business. You had the Greek Cypriots. You had the Italians. It was a very vibrant village. I mean, you used to walk down Old Compton Street, and everybody was out the window shouting and talking and having conversations.
As a young child growing up in Soho in the 50s, 7, 8 years of age, and seeing this man, this beautiful man, what is the lasting impact he had on you?
The lasting impact is his courage. He was black. That was a badge to bear at those times. Plus, he had this outrageous costume. When people say to me, will you come down and do some publicity for the pantomime you're doing? We want to shoot you in your costume outside. And I feel like an absolute fool when people come up to you and say, what kind of clothes are they? I really don't want to be there. Now, that man stepped out with such courage and such flamboyance. I mean, he played the part right the way down. I couldn't do it now, and he did it with total ease. When I first saw him, I thought, somebody's going to, jump on this guy sooner or later, But he was so pleasant, and people that were known for their violence in the area were very friendly with him. That surprised me and gave me so much respect towards him, because he was literally manipulating them with his personality.
And may you continue to do the good work.
I hope so.
Because without you, there is no future. You stop war, you stop strike, and when a man get a paper and study form, he go blind.
Monolulu was one of those guys who treated children as adults. You had conversations with him, which was mind-blowing, because usually it was, "Oi, get yourself out of here," and children should be seen and not heard. So this man had time for you.
Did that influence you in any way?
Yes, it certainly did. The fact that he was the first adult that I conversed with who treated me, and not as a child, but as an adult, I then must have taken it on board, because on approaching children's programs and I started to create a persona, I didn't want to sort of sit, "And now, children, I want you all to get this box and pretend it is a car. Now, I want you to get this box, pretend it's a car, right? And it's exactly as you would talk to an adult."
And I think in a weird way, and a knock-on effect, the way you approach kids, talking to me, a little black kid in the 70s in southwest London, as an equal, now when I do stand-up comedy for kids as well, and I approach it in exactly the same way.
My father was Ras Prince Monolulu. Yeah, he'd take me out of the house and I'd ride on his shoulders. And he had that beautiful afro hair, and I'd hang on to his hair.
Yeah.
You see, just like I'm riding a horse.
Yeah.
And he took me all around London. Everybody knew him.
That's the voice of Monolulu's son, Peter, recorded back in 1980.
There were very few black people in England at that time. Most of them were very hungry. Walked the streets, they had nowhere to sleep or nothing to eat. So my father would see every black man, he'd say, "Hey, countryman, come over here." He said, "This is my address, my house." He said, "You come anytime there and eat and drink."
I mean, this was so pleasing for me to hear, because although over the years Monolulu amassed fame and fortune, he clearly hasn't forgotten what it's like to struggle, and indeed where he came from.
No, sir. I'm one by myself. A lone wolf.
Lone wolf, eh?
Monolulu is a unique character, but his story reflects the life and times of many black people in Europe trying to survive in difficult times. It's an important story. So why is he overlooked by the history books?
I think in the early days, when people started to write about black people in British history, it was from a very politicised background. So only the kind of black political people got mentioned. Very easy to see him as this eccentric larger-than-life, charismatic figure. But there's a lot more going on than just I got a horse, and waving his feathers at people to attract attention.
Yes, indeed, so much more. I mean, why aren't we learning about people like Monolulu? Because I think back and growing up as a black kid in South London in the 70s, in our history classes, all we ever learned about was the Great Empire, and the only time black people were really mentioned was in the context of slavery. And learning about Monolulu, it makes me think about all the other amazing, important characters that I could have learned about, who also made their mark on the world.
Yes, sir. I'm 70 years of age this week. That's the 1st of June was my birthday. That's why they call it the glorious 1st of June.
This was recorded in Monolulu's advancing age, but as you can hear, he's still as lively and enchanting as ever.
And still going strong in all fetlock.
You might be wondering just how the amazing Ras Prince Monolulu departed this world. Well, rumour has it that when Monolulu was recovering in hospital from a case of pneumonia, the famous sports journalist Geoffrey Bernard came to interview him, and wishing him well, he brought along with him a box of black magic chocolates. And the prince actually choked to death on a strawberry cream. It's like he stage managed his own death. He couldn't just die of pneumonia. No, death by black magic chocolates. That, my friends, is the death of a legend.
And a white man on a small little boat gave me a piece of corned beef. I never eat that before in my life, and some jam and a hard biscuit. And I never seen my home since. Those are days when they Shanghai you, there was no power. So I had the German national flag, and all the officers roar with laughter. And that saved my life. Schwartz, my foreign from there, found myself following the gypsies, wandering gypsies, telling fortune, dancing. Then I came to a place called Marcel's. And as long as I get enough food, I never worry.